When we think about balance as we get older, most of us think about preventing falls. We think about staying independent, keeping our mobility, avoiding injuries. Those are the reasons balance is usually discussed, and they're incredibly important. While researching the science of physical aging and how our bodies change over time, I came across a study that completely caught my attention. At first, it looked like an ordinary research paper about physical fitness, but as I kept reading, I realized the researchers had uncovered something completely unexpected. Not something that replaced what we already knew about balance, but something that made it even more important. I had to know how they made that discovery. So I went back to the beginning and followed the science. To understand where this story began, I had to go back to the original study. The research was part of the Clinimex exercise cohort, a long-term project in Brazil designed to better understand how physical fitness, exercise-related measures, and traditional cardiovascular risk factors relate to long-term health. For this analysis, the researchers evaluated 1,702 adults between the ages of 51 and 75. Each participant completed the same standardized health and physical assessment. Researchers collected basic information such as age and sex. They measured height, weight, waist circumference, body mass index, and skin fold thickness to estimate body composition. They also documented medical history, cardiovascular risk factors, medications, and existing health conditions. As part of the physical evaluation, participants completed a series of routine functional assessments. One of those assessments was remarkably simple. They were asked to stand on one leg without support for up to 10 seconds. The free foot rested against the back of the supporting leg. Their arms remained by their sides. Their eyes looked straight ahead. Each participant could make up to 3 attempts. The results were recorded along with every other measurement. The evaluations were completed, the participants went home, and the researchers continued following their health over the years. At that point, it was simply another completed study. Years later, when the researchers analyzed the follow-up data, they noticed something that immediately caught their attention. Several years had passed since the participants completed their physical evaluations. The researchers had followed them for a median of 7 years, carefully recording what happened over time. When they analyzed the data, one result immediately stood out. Of the 1,702 adults in the study, about 1 in 5 couldn't complete the 10-second balance test. During the follow-up period, 123 participants died. When the researchers compared the results, they found something remarkable. Even after accounting for age, sex, body mass index, and several existing medical conditions, the people who couldn't complete the balance test had an 84% higher risk of death during the follow-up period. That was an extraordinary finding. A simple 10-second balance test appeared to reveal something much bigger than balance itself. The obvious question became, how could standing on one leg possibly be connected to survival? The study had uncovered something remarkable. Adults who couldn't complete a simple 10-second balance test had a significantly higher risk of death during the years that followed. But that discovery created an even bigger question. How could standing on one leg possibly be connected to survival? The balance test itself couldn't explain the finding. The researchers had to understand what the test was actually measuring. At first glance, standing on one leg seems almost too simple to matter. Most of us think balance is just about not falling. But the more scientists studied human balance, the more they realized something remarkable. Balance isn't a single ability. It's the result of multiple body systems working together at exactly the right time. To remain upright, your body has to know where it is in space. It has to detect even the smallest movement away from your center of gravity. Your brain has to process that information almost instantly. Then it has to send corrective signals to your muscles before you even realize you've started to lose your balance. Standing perfectly still is actually an illusion. Every second, your nervous system is making continuous, almost instantaneous adjustments to keep you upright. Most of those corrections happen automatically. We never feel them. We never think about them. But without them, we couldn't remain standing for very long. The researchers were beginning to realize that the balance test wasn't simply measuring balance. It was revealing how well multiple body systems were still working together. Now they needed to understand exactly which systems were responsible. Which body systems keep us balanced? The next question was whether vision could help explain the finding. Scientists discovered that vision is one of the brain's primary sources of balance information. Every moment you're standing, your eyes continuously provide the brain with information about your body's position in relation to the world around you. If your body begins to lean, even slightly, the visual scene changes. The brain detects those tiny changes almost immediately and begins sending corrective signals to the muscles before you consciously realize you've moved. But how did scientists know vision was doing all of that? One of the simplest experiments was also one of the most revealing. Participants were asked to stand on one leg with their eyes open. They then repeated the same test with their eyes closed. For most people, maintaining balance immediately became much more difficult. Without visual information, the brain had lost one of its most important sources of balance information. Researchers repeated similar experiments under different conditions. They removed visual information, altered it, and even created moving visual environments. Each time, balance performance declined. The evidence was clear. Vision plays a critical role in helping the brain maintain balance. But the experiments also revealed something equally important. People didn't immediately fall when they closed their eyes. Many were still able to remain balanced. Researchers also knew that many blind individuals develop very good balance by relying more heavily on other sensory systems. That meant vision couldn't be the whole explanation. The brain was still receiving continuous information from somewhere else. The investigation continued. If the eyes are only one part of the system, what tells the brain where the rest of the body is? If vision wasn't the whole answer, another system had to be providing the brain with continuous information about balance. Scientists found that the next major source of information comes from the vestibular system, located deep inside the inner ear. Although it's often called the body's balance system, it doesn't actually keep you balanced. Its job is to detect movement. Inside each inner ear are tiny fluid-filled semicircular canals arranged in 3 different directions. As your head turns, tilts, or rotates, the fluid moves inside these canals. Specialized sensory cells detect that movement and immediately send signals to the brain. Nearby are 2 additional structures called the otolith organs. Instead of detecting rotation, they detect straight line movement and, most importantly, the direction of gravity. Together, these structures constantly tell the brain whether your head is upright, leaning forward, turning sideways, accelerating, or slowing down. How do scientists know this? People with vestibular disorders provided one of the clearest answers. When this system is damaged, people often experience dizziness, vertigo, and severe difficulty maintaining balance, even when their muscles remain strong. Researchers also discovered that balance becomes much more difficult when both visual and vestibular information are disrupted at the same time. The evidence showed that the inner ear provides another essential source of information the brain depends on to keep us upright. But even that wasn't enough to explain the entire picture. Knowing where the head is isn't the same as knowing where the arms, legs, and the rest of the body are. Another system had to be supplying that information. The investigation continued. How does the brain know where every part of the body is without looking? Vision tells the brain where your body is in relation to the world around you. The vestibular system tells the brain where your head is moving and how gravity is affecting it. But another question remained. How does the brain know where the rest of the body is? Scientists eventually discovered an entire sensory system that most people have never heard of. It's called proprioception. Sometimes it's called our sixth sense, not because it's mysterious, but because it continuously tells the brain where every part of the body is without us having to look. Specialized receptors inside muscles, tendons, joints, and even the skin constantly send information to the brain. They report how much a muscle is stretching, how much tension a tendon is experiencing, the angle of a joint, and the position of each limb. This information is updated continuously, allowing the brain to know where your feet, knees, hips, arms, and hands are every moment you're standing. How did scientists prove this system existed? One of the strongest clues came from people who had lost proprioception because of nerve damage. Many of them could still move their muscles, but without this constant stream of sensory information, they struggled to coordinate movement and often had to watch their own limbs just to know where they were. Researchers also used tendon vibration experiments. By vibrating specific tendons, they could create the powerful illusion that a joint or limb was moving when it wasn't. The muscles hadn't changed position. Only the sensory information reaching the brain had changed. Those experiments demonstrated that the brain depends on proprioceptive signals to build an internal map of the body's position. The researchers were now beginning to see the full picture. Balance wasn't controlled by one system. It depended on vision, the vestibular system, and proprioception working together every second. But another mystery remained. Receiving information is one thing. How does the brain combine millions of signals and turn them into perfectly timed movements? Which part of the brain is coordinating the entire system? By this point, the researchers had identified three major sources of information: the eyes, the vestibular system, and proprioception. But collecting information was only part of the puzzle. Someone had to combine all of those signals into one clear picture of where the body was and where it was moving. Scientists discovered that this job belongs primarily to the brain, especially a structure called the cerebellum. The cerebellum sits at the back of the brain and is often described as the brain's coordination center. Every second, it receives information from the eyes, the inner ear, and proprioceptive receptors throughout the body. Instead of treating these signals separately, it compares them continuously. If all three systems agree, the brain knows exactly where the body is. If one system suddenly provides different information, the brain has to determine which signals are still reliable. Researchers have shown this through studies using moving visual environments, unstable surfaces, and vestibular stimulation. When the information from these systems conflicts, balance immediately becomes more difficult because the brain must resolve that conflict before producing the correct movement. Once the cerebellum has combined the information, it sends rapid corrective commands through the brainstem and spinal cord to the muscles responsible for maintaining posture. These adjustments happen automatically. Most occur long before we consciously realize our balance has changed. The researchers were beginning to understand something remarkable. Standing on one leg wasn't testing a single ability. It was testing whether the brain could continuously receive, compare, integrate, and respond to information coming from multiple body systems. But there was still one final piece of the puzzle. Receiving commands is one thing. How do the muscles respond quickly enough to prevent us from falling? How do the muscles keep us upright? After identifying the sensory systems and the cerebellum, researchers turned to the final part of the balance system, the muscles. At first, it might seem like muscles simply contract to keep us upright, but scientists discovered something much more sophisticated. The body doesn't respond the same way every time you begin to lose your balance. Instead, it automatically chooses different recovery strategies depending on how large the disturbance is. For very small movements, the body mainly uses the ankle strategy. Tiny muscles around the ankles make rapid corrections, gently shifting your body back over its center of gravity. Most of these adjustments happen so quickly and so automatically that you never notice them. If the disturbance becomes larger, the ankles alone are no longer enough. The nervous system immediately recruits the hip strategy. Larger muscles around the hips and trunk generate stronger, faster corrections to pull the body back into alignment. But if the body continues moving beyond the point where the ankles and hips can recover, a third strategy takes over. Without conscious thought, the brain automatically triggers a stepping strategy. You instinctively step forward, backward, or sideways to create a new base of support before you fall. Researchers discovered these three strategies aren't random. They're organized in a predictable sequence based on how much balance has been lost. The nervous system is constantly deciding which strategy will restore stability the fastest. This also revealed another important finding. Success doesn't depend only on muscle strength. It depends on how quickly muscles can respond to the brain's commands. Power, timing, coordination, and reaction speed all become just as important as strength itself. By now, the researchers understood that the balance test wasn't measuring a single ability. It was challenging an entire chain of systems working together in fractions of a second. But one final question remained. Why would the health of this entire systems be linked to survival? By now, the researchers had answered one question. The balance test wasn't measuring balance alone. It was simultaneously challenging multiple body systems that had to work together every second just to keep a person standing. Vision, the vestibular system, proprioception, the cerebellum, the nervous system, and the muscles. For just 10 seconds, every one of those systems had to perform successfully. If one system became less reliable, the others could sometimes compensate. But as the researchers looked at the evidence, they began asking a different question. What if the balance test wasn't revealing one weak system? What if it was revealing the combined health of the entire system? That completely changed how they viewed the test. It was no longer simply a measure of balance. It had become a window into how well multiple body systems could still communicate, coordinate, and respond together under a physical challenge. And that raised the biggest question of the entire investigation. Why would the health of all those systems be connected to survival? The original study showed that a simple balance test was associated with survival, but it still didn't explain why. To answer that question, I had to look beyond the original study and into the broader science of aging. One explanation many aging scientists propose is something called physiological reserve. Physiological reserve is the body's extra capacity to respond when life suddenly demands more from it. Every day, your body adapts to physical challenges, recovering after tripping on a curb, walking across uneven ground, climbing stairs, carrying heavy grocery bags, reacting before a fall, recovering after an illness, healing after an injury. Most of the time, we don't even notice these challenges because the body has enough reserve to adapt. Different body systems compensate for one another, allowing us to keep functioning even when something unexpected happens. Scientists have also learned something equally important. Physiological reserve isn't determined by age alone. Throughout life, the body continuously adapts to the demands placed upon it. When movement, strength, balance, and other physical challenges become too small or too infrequent, many body systems gradually lose part of that reserve. Aging contributes to this process, but prolonged physical inactivity can accelerate it. That helps explain why the balance test may reveal much more than balance itself. It challenges multiple body systems at the same time. If several of those systems have already lost part of their reserve, completing the test becomes much more difficult. The investigation had finally come full circle. What looked like a simple 10-second balance test was actually providing a glimpse into the body's capacity to adapt. If reserve can be lost, can it also be rebuilt? The final question was whether physiological reserve could be maintained. The answer from decades of aging research is yes. Although aging affects every one of us, physiological reserve isn't completely fixed. Researchers have consistently shown that the body continues adapting throughout life when it's exposed to meaningful physical challenges. Strength training helps preserve muscle strength, muscle power, and neuromuscular function. Balance training continually challenges the sensory systems, the brain, and the muscles to improve postural control and coordination. Regular physical activity helps maintain cardiovascular fitness, mobility, reaction speed, and the body's ability to respond to everyday physical challenges. Together, these adaptations help preserve physiological reserve. Not by stopping aging, but by helping the body maintain its capacity to respond, recover, and adapt. The investigation began with a simple balance test. It ended by revealing a much broader principle. The body preserves its reserve by continuing to adapt to meaningful challenges throughout life. When I first found this study, I thought I was going to learn more about balance. Instead, I ended up learning something much bigger about the human body. What looked like a simple 10-second test turned out to challenge vision, the inner ear, proprioception, the cerebellum, the nervous system, and the muscles, all working together in real time. Then I discovered the idea of physiological reserve, the body's ability to respond, recover, and adapt when life demands more from it. For me, that became the real story. The balance test wasn't important because everyone should practice standing on one leg. It was important because it revealed a much broader principle. The body doesn't preserve its abilities by avoiding challenges. It preserves them by continuing to adapt to meaningful challenges throughout life. That's what I took away from following the science.